Engage. There we go. All right. So this is the 13th part of our study of the first chapter of Yechezeqel, and we're coming up to some very interesting things in this verse. We're going to take a look at the 16th and the 17th verse tonight, because the 18th verse is, there's a lot of stuff in the 18th verse, so we're going to keep that for a study by itself. But before we do, let's talk to our Elohim, and we'll take a look at what I found was pretty neat. So, Pastor Yahuwah, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for your word. We thank you that we have the freedom to study. Tonight we ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. And we thank you for it in the name of Yahshua. Amen. All right, so Yechezeqel 16. And it simply starts off saying, the appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of beryl, and they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel within a wheel. Well, that's a whole lot better than our verse from last time that didn't make any sense. This one kind of makes a little bit of sense. But, so we're going to start with the first word that is mare, that means appearance. Now, we learned from previous studies that this word mare from ra'ah means not just to see, but to see what we think that we see. So in this there's a difference. Is it what we think we see, or are we actually seeing what it is? And this is something that we really have to be able to differentiate. So the root of this word is ra'ah, that means to perceive. It means to distinguish, to be able to tell, is it what I think it is, or is it something different? To learn about and to understand. So, in these definitions, we see the importance of knowing not simply what we know or believe, but understanding why we know or believe what we have, I guess, basically applied to our lives. A lot of people take doctrine or takenot, just, well, that's the way they've always done it. And I was reading, when I was doing Matthew today, it was the conversation between Yahshua and the Pharisees, that they said, why do you transgress the traditions of the elders? And Yahshua says, well, why do you not keep Torah and put your doctrines in its place? So this is something very important. Why do we believe what we believe, as opposed to just saying, well, that's what I've always believed? So we recall that it was Yahshua that said, you worship and you don't understand, or you worship what you don't understand. We could take that what and turn it into but, and say, you worship but you don't understand. So there's a whole lot of stuff in what do I believe and why do I believe it. And this is important as we move on in this study. So if we are to worship and build a relationship with Yahuwah, our Elohim and Heavenly Father, then we have to do so in truth and in spirit. And we remember that Yahshua, in the same conversation with the Samaritan woman, said, the Father is seeking those who will worship in spirit and in truth. Well, the spirit isn't going to connect if we're trying to build this relationship based on falsehood. So again, takes us back to we have to know what we worship. Now, the next word is ha-ofanim, that means the wheels. This word means to revolve. Ofan means to revolve, but its root, again, it's fen, that means face or presence. And from its Proto-Hebrew, we recall when we looked at it last time around that in the nun we saw the little seed with the root that represents continuance, and we saw the mouth that this literally represents the presence. So in this idea of then, we get the idea of a continuance in the presence or continuing in the presence, but it also means the turning of the face. So if we combine this with the ideas from our previous word, then we get a concept of abiding or continuing in the presence because we understand what we know and see, or turning away from the presence because we think that we know or see, but we're not doing this in truth. Does that make any sense? So there's a choice in that. Now this is very important in our walk with Yahuwah, who is our Elohim. He is our mighty judge who has the authority to redeem us, deliver us, restore us, and bring us rest. Elohim has the authority, but ultimately we have to make the choice. So, okay. Now this is important in our walk with Yahweh Elohim. We must build our relationship with Him based on His Word and not on our unproven understanding of it. If it cannot be confirmed in the Torah, then it requires a really good second look to consider whether or not we really want to continue in that belief. Now the next phrase will shed more light on this concept. And that phrase is, and their work was like unto the color of beryl. Not of a barrel, but beryl. I guess that was a oddball A that got in there. And I say, well, okay, how does and their work was like unto the color of beryl, how does that going to shed any light on what we've just talked about? The word for their work is uma'asachem, that comes from the word, again, masa, or ma'ase, that means a work or a deed, but it also means a pursuit or an achievement. It also means something that is offered, which is a very important definition to consider. It means something that is offered. What are we offering to Yahuwah, our Elohim? How are we pursuing our relationship with Him? And the root of this word, the root of ma'aseh, is asa, that aside from meaning to do, it means to accomplish or produce, but it also means to observe and to practice. Now, the very mistaken concept of not being saved by works is a very corrupt idea. We're not saved by anything. And again, there is no word in Hebrew for saved. This is a concept that came around in medieval times during the Dark Ages, when the concept of hell started to come up as well, that you had to be saved from going there. And this is how they were able to keep the people in subjection, keep them under their thumb, and keep them scared. So we are redeemed, delivered, and restored, and in order to remain this way, we must observe and put into practice the instruction of our Elohim that we find in His Torah, and then be productive in our lives as we pursue our relationship with Him. This is going to be really important as we go into verse 17, that particular idea. The next word that we come to in this phrase is ke'ain, that in this verse is translated as color, but it actually means eye, from its root ayin. This takes us back to perceiving what we see, understanding it, and applying it to our lives. This word is specific to the mental and spiritual processes or qualities. So, not necessarily meaning colors. I'm sure down far on the list of definitions it might mean color, but specifically it means eye, it means to perceive. And the next word is Tarshish, that in this phrase it's used for beryl. Tarshish is a type of amber that's it's a stone that's kind of a tan or yellowish color. In this phrase, it's describing a precious stone, but from its root resh, it means authority and inheritance. So we can construct an idea here that in perceiving the authority and applying the truth of the Torah of Yahuwah, we come into an inheritance. If we again consider the word ke'in, that was used for color, and again from its root that meant eye, we see this within the letters themselves, that we see the kaf that represents blessings, and they are found in the ayin, the perception of the yod that is the truth of Yahuwah in our, and there is the final form of nun that means life. And this is again confirmed in our next phrase, and they four had one likeness. The first word in this phrase is udemot, that means likeness, but also means to think and to consider in the same way. This word is followed by echad, that means one, but also means to be in unity with. The numerical value of echad, the gematria of echad, if we add it all together, is 13, which brings us to consider the 13th letter of the alphabet, which is mem, that represents not only the word, but it also represents transition. And then before we try to put anything together, the last word in this phrase is le'arbatan, meaning and they four. Now this is going to kind of take us in a little loop. This word comes from the root rabbah, that means four square, which equals 16. And 16 takes us back to ayin. The 16th letter of the alphabet is the ayin, that means to perceive. So the idea that we can now formulate is a confirmation of what we've been considering. We think and consider in unity with the one word of Yahuwah, and it is this that we seek to perceive. From this comes blessings, or the blessings, that are found in the perception of the truth of Yahuwah in our life. In perceiving the authority and applying the truth of the Torah of Yahuwah, we come into an inheritance. We are redeemed, delivered, and restored, and in order to remain this way, we must observe and put into practice the instruction of our Elohim that we find in Torah, and then be productive in our lives as we pursue our relationship with Him. We get the concept of abiding or continuing in the presence because we understand what we know and see, as opposed to turning away from the presence of Yahweh Elohim because we think that we know or see, but are not doing so in truth. This is very important in our walk with Yahuwah, our Elohim. We must build our relationship with Him based on His word and not on our unproven understanding. If it cannot be confirmed in Torah, then it requires a really good second look to consider whether or not we really want to continue in that belief. Now, we've picked that up from the first two phrases. The last phrase in this verse is, and their appearance and their work was, if it were, a wheel inside a wheel. So we're all looking and we're trying to figure out how to put this flying saucer together that Yechezeqel is seeing, and we're saying, okay, well, it's got a wheel inside a wheel, and it goes inside a box, and it's got, a really good bumper thing on it that has four faces. But the wheel inside a wheel, again, we find the root ra'ah, that means to perceive, learn, and distinguished, followed by the word for work whose root asa meant to accomplish and to produce, as well as to observe and to practice, which, if we put these together, gives us an idea of perceiving, learning, and distinguishing in order to accomplish and produce. This wheel inside a wheel. Remember, Ophan inside Ophan, a presence from then, a presence inside a presence. Okay? Both of these presences are continual. We are always inside of Yahuwah Elohim, and it is up to us to be able to perceive His presence, learn from His presence, and be able to distinguish what comes from Him from that is born in our carnal mind. We have to be able to understand what comes from Elohim and be able to distinguish that from whatever we come up with in our carnal mind. And we asked a question, I can't remember if we asked the question or if it was asked in another class, that can our mental faculties be carnal? Can we produce a carnal type spirit? So the answer to that was yes, that we can actually produce within ourselves a spiritual nature that goes contrary to the word based on our perception and not necessarily on the word of Elohim. And this is an important thing to understand, because if we are going to be present within the presence of Elohim, then we have to be able to worship in spirit and in truth, which takes us back to we have to know what we worship and why. We must again be able to see and know what we believe, as opposed to thinking that we know and what we believe. So we have to know what we believe as opposed to thinking what we know or what we think we know and believe. Yahuwah Elohim gave us His Torah for us to find our way to Him and reside in His presence. If we cannot prove our doctrine, dogma, or takenot by and in the Torah of Elohim, then we have to discard it and seek the truth. So, do you know what you worship? We are now going to take a look at verse 17, and verse 17 is going to validate what we've just talked about, but it's also going to take it one step further, because right now we're talking about us knowing what we know, us applying the truth of Elohim to our lives. But we're going to find out in a minute that it's not simply applying what we know to our lives and walking in truth, but it also involves those around us as well, because we're going to touch a lot of people, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But verse 17, when they went towards their four sides, they turned not when they went. Well, so this verse from a Hebrew perspective, actually says, in upon their four sides moved. Not much better than the English, I don't think. So the first word is al, or al, that aside from meaning in, also means according to, on account of, and concerning. Like everything else, this word also offers a choice, as it also means towards or against. And the letters themselves give us more information in that, again, we see the ayin. Again, here's perception. What do we see as opposed to what we think we see? And there's the lamed, that is instruction and guidance. So we can develop an idea now that according to our perception, we are either moving toward Yahuwah Elohim, according to, on account of, and concerning His instruction and guidance, or we're moving against it. next word is areba'at, that means four. And again, from its roots, rabbah, it means 4 squared, which equals 16 again. And we're going to see 16 another time in another word that literally means 4 squared, that is this exact root. The 4th letter of the Aleph Beit is Dalet, that represents both a door and spiritual poverty. The 16th letter of the Aleph Beit is the Ayin, that is a representation of perception. And in understanding this, we can further consider that it is our ability to perceive our spiritual state of being that allows us to recognize the door that the Torah is, and thus choose to move towards it or against it. And this is an important idea, that we have to be able to, first of all, establish that we are in spiritual need. And a question came up last Saturday that was a very good question about the woman with the issue of blood that we talked about, that she touched the zitzit, and then she made teshuvah and received her healing. But first of all, she had to make the effort to touch the zitzit, and that when she touched it in Mark, it gives us a lot more definitive explanation that when she touched it, she felt something change inside of her. So the healing begins as soon as we reach out for the word. And then Yahshua said to her, your faith, your belief has healed you. So we have to first make the effort. And she came from behind. The last letter of the Aleph Beit, again, is the Tav. That's where we are when we recognize that something has to change. And we cry out to Elohim. We reach for that zitzit. Everybody with me? Okay, good. Because I don't think I could explain it again. All right. All right, so we have said the ayin, that is a representation of perception. And in understanding this, we can further consider that it is our ability to perceive our spiritual state of being that allows us to recognize the door that the Torah is and choose to move towards it or against it. This isn't simply focused on us as individuals, and this is where the change-up starts. We usually talk about, how do I apply this to my life? But now we can also be in tune to recognize the spiritual condition of others, and in doing so, lovingly help them to find the door to life, that is the Torah, that's also called Yahshua, the word of Yahuwah, that brings redemption, deliverance, and restoration to those who will believe and receive. This is a very important thing for us to keep in mind, because in chapter 1, Yechezeqel is receiving strength and restoration so that, as we found in chapter 2, he can go to the captive children of Israel and bring them the hope of redemption, deliverance from deliverance from bondage, or deliverance from bondage, and restoration in the name of Yahuwah, which is again known as Yahshua. It's interesting to note that the Aramaic word sevar is used where the Greek word evangelion has replaced it. Sevar means hope, and it is the hope found in Yahshua that is proclaimed in the Bazora of Yahshua. Say, in the Gospels. If we read them from the Aramaic, we're going to see the word sevar or sevarta as opposed to the word evangelion. Evangelion, it means a gospel, it means a testament. Sevarta actually means hope. And when they are proclaiming the gospel that we read about from the Greek, literally they are proclaiming the hope that is Yahshua. That grabbing onto this hope, you can literally make it manifest in redemption, deliverance, and restoration. You can make it real. That's why we have to understand the difference between the concept of Yahshua, that this redemption, deliverance, restoration comes from Yahuwah, that was made possible by Yahshua, the Son of Man, who came as the vehicle of sacrifice to shed the blood to restore the covenant between Elohim and Adam. So, this idea can be further supported in the next word, which is riv ehen, that's translated as sides. Okay. This word literally means 4 parts or a square and is identical to the root of arebaat, that was Rabbah. This again leads us back to 4 squared, which is again 16, or the ayin. That means perception, knowing what we see. Is it half full? Is it half empty? The idea of perception takes us back to what we considered in verse 16, and the next word is bechlektam, that we're going to see 2 more times in this little phrase here, that in the verse is used to say they went, but literally means to go or to move. It also means to walk, as well as a way of living or a way of life. This word is followed by yelehu, that means the very same thing. So you have 2 words in a row that mean the very same thing. This provides us with the idea of the way of life is to walk. And if we consider the last phrase that says they turned not when they went, then we might consider that the way to life is to walk without turning. So, straight and narrow. There we go. So if we take that into account, let's consider the Hebrew of this last verse. The word lo means no or not, but it also means without. If we take into account the Hebrew letters, we see the Lamed, again, instruction and guidance, and then we see the Aleph of Yahuwah Elohim. So in this we can formulate an idea of the way to life is to not walk without the guidance and the instruction of Yahuwah Elohim. The next word is yisabu, which means to turn, but it also means to assemble around or to surround or to envelop. Yisabu, the root of this word is sabab, which is the first time that we see the letter samek as the root of a word in Torah, where the river Pishon surrounds the land of Havilah. We don't see samek very often, but when we do, it has something very important for us to say. So if we add this into the idea that we're developing, we can consider that the way to life is to not walk without the guidance and instruction of Yahuwah Elohim, but to be assembled to and surrounded by it. The next word takes us back to belechtan, that once again means to walk, to proceed, and a way of life. So with this, we can consider the way to life is to not walk without the guidance and the instruction of Yahuwah Elohim, but to be assembled to and surrounded by it as we proceed with this way of life. So our overall ideas in both of these verses, it's really interesting. We have our English-based Bibles that are chapter and verse in a certain way. They don't always match the chapter and verse in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Tanakh. Now, we would say, well, that really doesn't matter. Those were added in after the fact, and they are just used to help us find chapter and verse. The only thing is, the rabbis, the scribes, don't do anything without it meaning something. And in this, we see verse 16, the ayin, perception. It's talking to us about perception. We think and consider in unity with the one word of Yahuwah, and it is this that we seek to perceive. From this comes blessings that are found in the perception of the truth of Yahweh in our life. In perceiving the authority and applying the truth of the Torah of Yahweh, we can come into an inheritance. We are redeemed, delivered, and restored, and in order to remain this way, we must observe and put into practice the instruction of our Elohim that we find in Torah